What would you do? Right, we have this scenario. I've never experienced this scenario, but I'm sure people have.
Okay.
So you're discussing a job candidate. So, you're interviewing for a position. You're discussing a job candidate who wears a hijab. And a hiring manager says they're worried clients won't be able to relate to her. What would you do?
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Well, before you answer that question, I have another question. Have you ever worked with anyone in a workplace where there was a woman wearing hijab?
Yes, many times. Yes. Yes, I have. I suppose one of the environments that I've worked in is a media advertising environment where there's lots of work, lots of play, it's a very social kind of culture where there's alcohol, which is openly there from midday onwards. And I know that there's my ex-team colleague who has worn a hijab in this environment. That hasn't phased her. It hasn't phased, fortunately, but it hasn't phased anyone in the environment. But I think I'd put that down to the company itself. The company I was working for, they wouldn't have tolerated any kind of discrimination or bias towards anyone wearing a hijab. So I'm quite fortunate around to have that experience. And the other experience where I had is it's actually been working remotely. So I haven't had the exposure to any of my co-workers and the impact that wearing a hijab has had. So those are the two experiences that I've had. In this particular, what would you do? If I was part of a hiring team and my colleague had said that when they had concerns around how this candidate would represent the company in terms of clients, was that the question?
Well,
sorry.
It says they're worried clients won't be able to relate to her.
Clients wouldn't be able to relate to her. I'd be asking whoever said that. I'd be asking the person. I'd deep dive into it and ask about what exactly would they mean, and if it did come up in terms of the hijab or the way the person looked because they were of a different culture, then that's then I'd basically focus in on the skills at the interview that the candidate showed, and just base it on that and bring that back to the room and base the selection of that.
Beautiful. That's cool. I actually, I have not worked with anyone ever wearing a hijab. I'm thinking now, the companies I've worked at, whether anyone, no, I haven't at all, which is quite interesting. I haven't.
You ever, I suppose, thing that came up from memory now is a few years ago, but the experience that I had with working with a team member who's wearing a hijab, and it was obviously because that's her culture and that's her religion. And in her religion, there's a fasting season.
Ramadan, yeah.
I remember the organization actually, and she was the only person at the company who I don't know how it came about, whether or not she requested it or if the organization put this into place, but they actually changed their hours slightly during the month of Ramadan, and because it was a case of energy levels and concentration levels. And so just making sure that she was able to continue doing the work as comfortably as she could to the best of her abilities, but also being mindful, the organization was mindful of the fact that it's Ramadan and it requires fasting. And so, and in terms of that particular fasting period, it can impact concentration and focus. And the work that she was doing was around quality assurance. And so, which demands focus and concentration, and so the organisation actually can put in some steps.
Well, that's good. I mean, I've worked very closely with a Muslim lady. She just didn't wear a hijab. So I'm familiar, with the Ramadan, and I remember we should be fasting. Luckily for us, is we had quite flexible working environment anyway. So you could start later, start early, finish late, as long as you got your work done. It didn't bother people. It was accepted working culture. So that wasn't necessary to specifically, modify her hours in that respect. But yes, I remember when she would be doing Ramadan. So I haven't had this situation. I guess I don't know whether she chose, maybe she wore a hijab outside of work. I don't know. I never asked her. I'm wondering about it now. This is the situation. And I'm wondering if she maybe never chose, I'm just thinking, I did go to her house as well, she wasn't wearing a hijab. So maybe she just is someone that chooses not to wear it anyway.
Yeah, I suppose it's an interesting one, because I'm going to turn this question around a little bit in terms of what would you do. So I'm going to turn it around a little bit and saying, okay, if I was of Muslim, if I was following the Muslim religion and I was wearing a hijab inside the house, when I was applying for jobs, or if I went out to work, would I wear a hijab? And I think for me, I would think about, okay, well, my identity, but I would also think about the organization. And I'd be thinking, okay, is this organization an organization that is going to support me, not put any attention around specific bias or discrimination? And if it was, then I wouldn't want to be working for that organization. So for me, I'd be, yeah, if I was an individual wearing a hijab, then I'd still wear it to work. And because I'd be thinking, okay, well, I'm hoping and I'd be expecting that the organization that I do put my time and effort towards would be supporting, my culture that I follow. And it doesn't have an impact on the work quality that I'm presenting. And that comes back into the answer to what would you do? Because regardless of whether you're wearing a hijab or not, it ideally shouldn't have an impact on your work output. However, it's down to that client how they see that,
and that's what they're talking about here, really. And for me, it's like, I don't know, I kind of don't care what, if you're, I don't know, if I'm idealistic, but my clients, I'm providing a service to my clients, and I will work with clients that need my services or can be supported by my services, but are somehow aligned to my values. And I'm very open about what my values are. I make sure it incorporates it into my content, it's incorporated in my website, it's incorporated into as much of communication as I put out there. And I'd expect a company does the same with its missions and its values on its website. So I would be saying that a client would have an idea about a company's values, and whether that would be acceptable, I don't know. I just think there's always people in the world that will have problems with different cultures, and we know that, we see it on the news all the time. I'd be saying, if you don't like it, go elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, there could be a situation whereby, for example, an employee who's wearing a hijab, let's say working in an advertising company, and they've been working in this advertising company for years, and then one of their top clients ends up, for a business, ends up being an alcohol company. And if that person wearing a hijab is going for a promotion, how would that impact the business, a portfolio, if one of their biggest clients is an alcohol?
I don't think it matters, as long as that person doesn't have a problem working in it. You might not be Muslim and you might not drink.
That's exactly that. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that it can sometimes depend on the situation. Maybe that's where that question's coming from. Again, from all perspectives, but in terms of my experience, there's never been any cause whether or not someone wears a hijab or not. And I'll
tell you one context, because everything's context dependent, right?
Yeah.
So let's say you have a problem with Muslims. You believe, especially because you've got extremist Muslims.
Yeah.
I just think it's ridiculous to generalize a religion and a community because of extremists, because if everybody behaved like that, nobody'd like Catholics, because the IRA were an extremist, group of Catholics, for example, and they were terrorists. But I don't understand why then people don't hate Catholics. Do you know what I mean? Or the Catholic priests are known to abuse children. Does everybody then hate Catholics? So there are people that part of those communities that give the community a bad name, right?
Yeah, that's right. But it's double, and that comparison that you've made, it obviously illustrates this blatant double standard.
Yeah,
Muslims and Catholics, and it's
so Muslims are not bad people because they've got extremists who are terrorists, right? So there's that part. So imagine, this is the only context I can think of where it could even be a problem, especially in America, because it seems to be more of a thing in America. That 9/11 just happened, okay? So some Muslim terrorists, Islamic extremists, have killed so many people, and there's all this pain, all this grief, all this hurt, as anger, And now you're taking every day as it comes and you're still doing business as usual. And you're put to work with someone who's Muslim.
Yeah, and I think we see what you're explaining there. I think I believe it did actually happen straight after 9/11. And again, like I say, especially in America, it was the entire Muslim community, whether or not they wore a hijab or not, they were pretty much, they felt like they were walking on eggshells. They were being tarnished with that same terrorist brush. I think even nowadays, I don't know if you speak to some Muslims, when they go through airports, what their experience would be,
Yeah.
So, that's years on.
Yeah. So. Well, I'll tell you what's interesting. Apparently, the drug testing and all that you're going through security is random now. So what happens, when you go through the beeper thing, there's a light comes on and it's supposed to be random, like programmed randomly.
Yeah.
So
like
that light comes
up.
Yeah. So when the light goes on, that whoever's walked through gets checked, and rather than the person doing the checking just deciding who gets checked. That's fantastic. That's how it should be. Whether that's how it actually works, but that's how it should be. But anyway, why it matters. The hiring manager's statement could unfairly shut out the woman from a job she's well qualified for. It would also mean your company would miss out on adding her talent and diverse perspective to the team. Plus, statements like this can reinforce discrimination against Muslim women by presenting a spurious business case for not hiring them. It's true, because you're excluding them. Maybe your client would have a problem. So it would be interesting to know how a company would deal with it.
Yeah. And I suppose this comes back into, I know it was a previous podcast episode where we mentioned this about the importance of marketing and when it comes to organizations and what message they're putting out in their marketing to present who they are. And, I know some, there's some organization websites that I've looked at when you look at like, who are we? And basically they have pictures of women wearing hijabs, and, that's the norm. And so if there was that scenario in what we've just been discussing, it shouldn't come as a surprise to the client, because that's who the company have represented themselves to be. They've represented themselves to be a team of employees coming from a collection of different diversities. So
exactly. So I guess it comes down to what you're saying there. How has the company represented themselves in the marketplace? So the client should know who they are, really.
Yeah, and I think the company that I was previously working at, that's what they did very well. They presented themselves as a group of individuals who had a set of skills, regardless of what color, what background, what they wear on their heads. It wasn't about that. And that's what, obviously, one of the reasons why they led to having such a successful team.
Yeah. And then this is what the suggestion is of what you could do. If you're actually in this situation, you could say to the hiring manager, I don't understand why they wouldn't be able to relate to her, and list a few of her qualifications for a client-facing role. You're interviewing them, so something on the CVs got them there, right? And then if they've demonstrated that in the interview, then that's what you focus on, what you said. Yeah, qualifications, client-facing role. In general, refocusing the conversation on the criteria for the role that helps to shut down the bias. Brilliant. That's kind of what you said, right?
Yeah.
And then it says why it happens. Hijab wearing women can suffer discrimination based on their ethnicity, their religion, and gender. So all those reasons. Many Americans negatively judge the hijab, seeing it as a sign of backwardness, extremism, or of Muslim women's oppression. Okay. As a result, they might see the woman as less modern. Oh, these are all things I hadn't thought about. Yeah. They may see the woman as less modern, lacking in agency, and less relatable to clients. In reality, the hijab isn't a sign of any of those things, and women who wear it have a wide range of experiences and beliefs. But this biased thinking can hurt hijab wearing women, as they are less likely to be hired than women overall.
Interesting.
It is interesting.
Definitely
an interesting one.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's part of the reason why Muslims choose not to wear the hijab in the workplace.
Yeah, do you know what? I never actually had a conversation with my team worker who I used to work with, who I mentioned in this podcast, who wears a hijab. We had lots of chats over lunch, over work, but it never came up. But that's only because I suppose, I didn't see that as I don't know, I never saw it as an issue, but maybe I should have actually spoken to her about wearing the hijab. Actually, it never really came up. It'd be interesting. I'm still in touch with her. So maybe I'd actually like to have that conversation, maybe even invite her on the podcast.
Yeah, maybe. I'm thinking about my old colleague as well. I'm like, would she have ever wanted to wear one? Did she choose? Was that a choice never to wear one ever, or was it a choice never to wear one in the workplace? I'm really curious about that now. And also what it made me think of is me when we were talking about how she would have loved to wear a sari to work. So that was one of our first episodes. I called it Wearing a Sari to Work Day or something like that. And I said, why don't you wear a sari to work? Yeah. And she was very conscious of a perception of how she would look, whether it was perceived as professional or whether more, I think for her more, it would stand out more because she would look so different that nobody else would be wearing that. Yeah. I don't know, but it's interesting because I remember, because like I said to you, where I grew up was very much a large community of people from Pakistan, people from India. I remember female doctor wearing sari.
Sari, I know, that's right. I remember you saying, and I've worn a sari to work. I remember, and this is back in, this was 20 years ago. I was working for a TV show, and I was working in production. So I was working on a Richard and Judy this morning show in the UK. And I was part of the production team and I wore a sari to work. And the reason being is because I've always liked the look of a sari. But it's it's not an easy thing to wear. There's a lot of, I think it's about 3 meters of material there. And, a lot of it can be embroidered. So it can feel quite heavy. And if you're a petite frame like I am, it's not the easiest things to pull off, especially in a workplace. And so, but I just wore it. I wore it for one day. And I think I wore it because I think I remember there was a feature about the Indian look, Rich and Judy we were covering. And I thought it'd be great, even though I was off camera, it'd still be good to embrace that feature being discussed. So I wore a sari to work. And to be honest with you, it's like there was a few people that thought, oh, wow, this is really amazing. This is really, you look great. But I remember nobody batted an eyelid. Nobody batted an eyelid. There was the crowd that I was working with, the team I was working with, it was mainly white female workers. But yeah, there wasn't anyone else who was from an Indian background. And but they didn't bat an eyelid. And so I could have worn a sari to work practically every day of the week, but it wouldn't matter. So, and that was it. And that was in the UK. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I just wonder now. Would I wear African clothes to work? No, because I don't wear them out of work. So to me, it's not a thing anyway. But I just think if you want to wear that, you should be able to wear that.
I think with some cultural I suppose pieces of clothing, I think it's more to do with the practicality side of things.
Sure.
For example, with a sari, it's about 3 meters long, and it takes a little bit of time to work through, and then to actually put it on. And also with a sari, there's also a portion of your midriff which is on display, which is shown. And that might not be professional in the workplace.
Okay.
So that's why, in terms of practicality, the sari is a beautiful piece of dress. However, it's may not be suitable for the workplace, which is why a lot of Indian women don't necessarily wear it. Whereas with the hijab or even African dresses, it may be more suitable. There may not be parts of your body that are necessarily shown. With a hijab, it's actually covering parts of your body. So, and the practicality of it may not be as complex as with a sari.
Yeah, I get that. But isn't there other style clothing, Indian, Pakistani, that doesn't show midriff? There's other types.
Yeah, there's what's called a salwar kameez, which is basically a tunic top and then some trouser bottoms. That's normally the trend or the style of dress for Punjabis or people of Sikh origin.
Okay. So, but I'd like to see people wearing that if that's what they're used to wearing. And then it comes down to that whole question of what is professional at work, because to me, black pencil skirt and shirt is so old fashioned. as a professional look and boring, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I think fashion, and also I think fashion has also, the world of fashion has also taken this into account. And I know that I've seen certain styles which have come up through the years, like, for example, the Nehru collar, which is basically an Indian origin shirt, where it's the collars which are turned up with a Nehru. So it's like collarless. And that's sort of seen its way through to fashion, both in men's and women's fashion. But also it's kind of like, for example, a tunic dress, you can still, and, you know, in terms of patterns from African or Indian regions, you know, incorporated in business wear. So I've seen that. So I think what's happening is that we have been seeing more traditional dresses and patterns seep into the business wear.
Yeah, I find it interesting. I'm trying to think about, I have heard people comment on somebody not looking or dressing professional, but it would be more things like revealing a lot, you know, really short skirt or low cut top, or even for men wearing thongs and shorts, or maybe that's not professional because that's very casual, laid back. I don't know. Yeah, I guess, and also I think it depends if you're client facing as well. If you don't deal with clients, if you're not seeing clients, how does it matter what you wear? If you're not offending anyone, you're not turning up naked. I don't know. I was trying to think of, I remember one lady, and she dressed, I love how she dressed. Lots of colour, very eccentric, if you could call it that. I just think it was amazing. I wanted to see her every day, what's she wearing. Just made the workplace more interesting.
It does, actually. That's just it. Yeah. And I remember, one of the companies I used to work at, and actually even going back to school, in my school days that I mentioned, and we didn't have a uniform. One of the things about going to school the next day was to see what is everyone else going to wear. And also it was exciting you had to dress up every day for school. It was, even though it was a little bit more pressure, and whereas obviously the focus should have been on the schoolwork, but there was also a sense of, there was also focus on who are you, what kind of identity do you have? And there was so many fashion kind of stories out there. So,
well, I just think within reason, you should be able to wear what you want to wear. And because, you know, for some people, how they dress reflects their personality. That's like a meaning to them. For me, I just like to wear vibrant color. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel a certain way to wear certain clothes. So that's a part of how I express myself. But sometimes I just want comfort. You know what I mean? And for some other people, they couldn't give a hoo-ha what clothes they wear. It's not important for them. So I just think just like, as long as you're not distracting people.
Yeah, it's great to express yourself through your clothes. So, but also it's like, if you believe in a certain culture and a certain religion, and it's, again, if you're not, as long as you're not hurting anyone and you're not pushing any opinions onto others, then you should be able to dress the way you want to in the workplace. And if that's in accordance with your religion, then so be it.
Well, feel comfortable to do it as well, because obviously Mina didn't feel comfortable, but that might be more about what she thinks about it than what her actual colleagues think.
Yeah.
So what would you do? I got my lovely singing voice. So this, what would you do? We like workplaces. This would be a workplace scenario. So this is the scenario when it's suggested that insert your own minority, Black person, person of color, whatever. Actually, it doesn't even need to be a minority. I can think of it just being expat.
Okay, right. So let's hit me with a circumstance and then I'll decide.
All right. When it's suggested that a colleague, presents at a client meeting, so they're going to present to your clients.
Right.
Someone says, as a concern, she has a strong accent.
Okay, right. Okay, so this scenario is around someone questioning about the ability or the suitability of a presenter who has an accent. Right, I see. Okay, so it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because in the workplace nowadays, there's so many individuals from differing backgrounds. There's so much and different regions, different countries. And, there's a strong likelihood of a team member that you're working with, who is not from who's not been brought up in the same country and, has an accent, and English may not even be their first language. So, this probably comes up a lot. I doubt it's, well, I don't know whether or not, people question it or not, but if they do, I've never come across that scenario when someone's questioned it. But I'd probably ask about, I'd probably say, yeah, it's great. And they've got a great speaking voice too. I'd probably return it around. So I wouldn't go down the path around like questioning, why would that be an issue, that type of thing. But if it did turn into an issue, then I suppose it's about, highlighting the fact that it's good to get somebody on board to present the client meeting. And, regardless on whether or not they've got an accent, as long as they can articulate the message, the content of the work across to the audience, that's all that counts, really.
And I've actually had this experience, kind of a similar one anyway. And I'm thinking about it now. I'm just like, what would I've done differently in that scenario? We've had this. All I will say is that we were having a meeting to train our clients, usually doctors. And so we asked the medic in the company to present clinical data, clinical information. If English was not their first language, this person's English was not their first language. And not only did they have an accent, but their English was not very good. And so this was raised as a concern. And we did move to ask to have somebody else present.
Okay, but that's mainly because it wasn't necessarily their accent, but it was the fact that their English language skills. Yeah. And hence going back to that point I made about, as long as the message, the content of the work is conveyed successfully. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you made me think about it. It's the fact that they had an accent was part of it, but only made it worse because their English wasn't very good.
I see.
But then also we had people whose English was good, where we also make the request that they didn't present because the way they presented was very monotone, very quiet, just doesn't have the skill to present and be engaging and people to pay attention.
Yeah, and if that's the purpose of the presentation, if that's part of the purpose of the presentation, then you have to consider those attributes when it comes to the selection of the speaker.
Yeah, and in any case, now I would have given feedback that there needs to be some sort of development to help them improve and, get to the point where they can present at a level that's required.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of Toastmasters are also available there for. So a lot of people go to Toastmasters, and I've actually been to one in Sydney. And again, my question aside came out because I spent a lot of time asking other people in the group, what led you to come to Toastmasters? And that was one of the main reasons they came, was because there were either opportunities in their workplace of presenting and they weren't confident about this, or they had a presentation due in their workplace and they were not very confident in terms of, it was mainly like their style of presenting, nerves around presenting. So that's Toastmasters.
Yeah, so you can upskill that, right? But then also English is my first language, and I know that sometimes people struggle understanding me. I have an accent. I may have an accent.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a lot of people here in Australia, I know, I shouldn't say a lot of people, but I know people here in Australia where, when it comes to the northern part of England, especially Newcastle, they struggle to understand. And I know, working in the TV industry previously, I know that when there have been programs whereby the content is going to be televised in other countries, English-speaking countries, if there's a Newcastle presenter, there'll be captions and subtitles.
Right. Well, then that might be a solution. Honestly, if that's a solution, that's a solution. But I just remember, you just reminded me, I went speed dating once. I went speed dating lots of times, actually. But this particular time was years ago. I went speed dating, and there was lots of different people. The women stayed and the men moved.
Yeah.
And I had a 3-minute conversation with each man. Yeah. And then sat in front of me was a Caucasian Australian man. And all he said to me was, I can't understand what you're saying.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, that's all he could say to me for the 3 minutes. I don't understand what you're saying.
It's interesting, isn't it? I don't have any struggles, understanding you at all. And even people from Newcastle, I've worked with Ant and Dec. Didn't have any problems understanding them. It's strange how other people, take on accents. Maybe it's because, again, they may not have been exposed to one before.
Well, I just think that's what it is. You have to. The more you hear, the more you understand. It's as simple as that.
It's exposure. And this is another reason why, if regardless of whether or not someone, as long as somebody in the workplace has the ability to convey the message of a presentation, then in terms of them having an accent, that shouldn't be a criteria for them not to be selected as a presenter, because it comes down to that exposure. So I know that in an advertising company that I previously worked at, I remember there was a female co-worker of mine, and English wasn't her first language. She moved to Australia about 10 years ago, and she stood up and made presentations. She was heavily accented, and she did a great job. And our group, the audience, they didn't focus on the accent. They were focusing on the content, because what she was presenting was so engaging and so interesting.
But they could understand what she was saying despite the accent.
Yes, it's very heavy. She was very heavy. It was very heavy accent, but that wasn't that wasn't part of the feedback. I didn't interfere with the feedback.
No. So to me, there's two possibilities for this kind of comment. This is just my experience. One is that you actually don't understand what they're saying because you haven't had enough exposure. And the second is you hear the accent and you assume that you won't understand them. There's two different kind of responses there, and I don't know which one this is. So I guess what it would be a case of is, I don't know what the suggestion is yet because I haven't read it, but if somebody said to, she has a strong accent, and my question would be, okay, they have a strong accent. Maybe they have a strong accent. That's subjective, really, right? Can you understand what they're saying, though? Yes or no? Like, can you understand what the message they're trying to convey?
That's exactly it.
Yeah. And if they say no, then
it's worthwhile reconsidering the selection process.
Well, it depends, because again, I'd be like, is it them, or is it how many people does it impact? Do you understand, like, whoever's in the room? Like, I want to generally know, because
so it'd be worthwhile putting it out there to the group. So because they're going to do one or two things. If it's a minority of people, I'm thinking they specifically haven't had enough exposure, and I'll go with the majority. But then if it's the majority of people thinking, we can't really understand, they're going to help that person get better. But that's an interesting one, because if the speaker with the accent understands the content, but it's literally about the fact that they have a very heavy accent, and a majority of the team have difficulty comprehending their words because of the accent, then is it a case of, and how would you approach that? With that?
Well, this is the thing. You have to help that person improve their speaking, their English. There'll be an action plan there, but also
that's on the accent. It's like saying to someone, can you improve on your accent?
No, I mean, it's not about the accent. It's, can you understand the words they're saying? Yes or no? And even if you help them improve, I've got less of an accent. You want to hear me when I'm back in Blackburn?
I'd love to do that.
I've got less of an accent speaking outside of there, because I know people understand me better.
Right.
And if you learn it, it's not even conscious. Ask anybody who's been told that nobody understands them. Their accent has changed, just being better understood. That happens naturally, and it happens naturally with practice. So that's how I would help that person, right? But then we're in the day of technology. I went to a conference the other week, and every speaker on the stage spoke English very well, even if it was the second language. There was people from all over Europe speaking English, except for one woman. And where was she from? I think she was from Brazil, and she spoke in her native language, and sat next to her was an interpreter translating everything she said.
Right.
right? So there was two things. One, she had a translator. She's still the expert speaking because she's the expert, but she had a translator. That's not necessarily practical in everyday workplace. Got it. The second thing they had was AI transcribing as live.
Yeah, I like that option whereby there's
captions.
There'd be captions added, especially if it's a presentation you're mentioning. Okay, it's quite a presentation. If there's a presentation that is slides, I like the idea of there being captions.
And even in a Zoom meeting,
as opposed to not selecting that person.
Yeah, exactly. So you do as much as you can to select that person because it gives them exposure, right?
Yeah, and also having captions there, I suppose it's like, it's a company initiative, and it's the company, we're supporting our employees who may not have English as a first language, or who have struggles or difficulties in terms of, or obstacles in terms of presenting.
Well, it's being more inclusive. It's having a more diverse.
Yeah, that's it.
Thing. Yeah, it's all of those things.
So I think I like that idea. I really like that idea, actually. And I think if I was in the audience of a company, let's say if there's a lunch and learn, for example, and I rocked up and I saw this as captions, that's what would run through my mind, thinking, that's great that they've accommodated this for people who may not understand my co-worker.
Yeah. And you can do captions in Zoom now. You can actually turn it on. So that in a meeting, when people
speak, I love that. Oh, I didn't know that, actually.
I do it in Zoom. Yeah, you can. I mean, it's not the best, as in it's not perfect, but the technology's there and it's getting better all the time.
Yeah, and it's really great because let's say, for example, when you have town halls in this 1,500 employee strong company, you don't know whether or not, and the leadership team may not know if there's people of with hearing difficulties, for example. And so turning on the caption to make the town hall more inclusive, that's something maybe companies and employers should consider, actually.
Yeah, we just thought of a new initiative.
Yeah, it's actually quite good.
Yeah, that's a good, they should do it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, okay. Well, it says.
Let's see. What do the experts say? Right.
Why it matters. This comment could torpedo your co-worker's chance to present at a meeting, which would be a major missed opportunity for her to prove her skills and show her value to the company. And this is how bias against people with accents can harm people. It can mean that people miss out on assignments, jobs, and promotions for which they are qualified. Okay. And it says you could say that you don't have any trouble understanding her. If that's true, this is what I mean. You don't have any trouble understanding her. You think she'd do a great job at the meeting. You could also ask whether there's a problem with her expertise on the subject matter. If she knows the topic well, her accent shouldn't make a difference. Yeah. And then why it happens. Many people unconsciously assume an accent means a person has poor language skills. That's what I mean. There's an assumption that you understand them just because you hear the accent. Even if their grammar and word choice are perfectly correct. The bias particularly hurts, and it says Latinas here, but it's talking about America.
Yeah.
I would say it hurts Black people, Asian people from, with accents here. And people tend to perceive women with accents as less intelligent and knowledgeable than other women. And it means Latina women. Your colleague may also be hearing an accent where there isn't one. Research shows that people can falsely perceive an accent when a person of color speaks completely unaccented American English. Do you know what that reminds me of? When we had Frankie on and she's talking about her husband, like she's got the accent. He was born in Australia, but he's Asian descent, so he looks Asian. And people are asking him where he's from.
Yeah.
Even though you hear her speak a foreign accent with a foreign accent and him speak with a native accent.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting.
And can we also really be assigning like a judgment or a discrimination when it comes to someone's accent? It can be kind of also reversed in the sense that I had an experience when I first arrived in Australia. This was back in, I think, 2002. And I went for a job interview and I had arrived slightly late. and they already were interviewers. She already had my CV, and she was reading through it. And when I walked into the room, I sat down, and the first thing I did was I apologized for being late. And her response was, the interviewer's response was, oh, you have a British accent. Oh, I wouldn't be able to tell. You wouldn't be able to tell. And that was actually seen in my favor. So what she was expecting,
I know, but that's still a bias. It's discrimination.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's what I'm saying, is that it's like my accent somehow it was seen as a plus in her eyes.
Yeah, because they assume people can't.
Because the assumption was because because I had an Indian surname, or have an Indian surname, because I have an Indian name, and because when I walk through a door I look Indian. The interviewer was not expecting a different accent. So she was expecting an Indian accent. And when I spoke with my British accent, which is what I have, somehow that was seen more as highly regarded.
I honestly think people should keep those thoughts to themselves, because I don't think they realize how it makes them look.
And it was quite shocking at the time. So it was about 20 years ago that happened.
Yeah, I've had people being surprised the other way. Like, it's weird. Like, just say I've met a new friend. Well, this is an exact example. Met a new friend, and we become really close, and she invites me to a family event. Now, she's been talking about her friend Tracy for lots of times with her family, and she's asked, can I bring Tracy to our party or whatever, dinner, whatever. Tracy turns up, and they look at me like, oh, I wasn't expecting. Honestly, I've had that. Hi, Tracy. Wasn't expecting to be a black girl. We weren't expecting Tracy to be black. They were surprised.
Wow. Okay. And so when you've been in a situation where you rocked up to a friend's family?
I've been in a situation a couple of times.
And the family,
surprise, not in a horrible way, just surprised.
Yeah. Do they tell you? Oh, we're surprised.
Well, I asked later, wow, they just made an assumption. They just thought you were white. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Older generation. Tracy as a name assigned to white people in their heads, obviously.
Yeah.
It's a bias. It's just a bias.
It's like when you get a story, and I'm noticing this in the books that I'm reading now, is that when you and I hadn't really thought about it before until now, because it's so before when books are in general, if books are talking about a couple in a certain sense, so it's normally written as a couple, and then I automatically think a heterosexual couple. But now the last few books that I've read have actually referred to a couple, and then later down the track in the story, it actually ends up being a gay couple. But the actual sexuality is not anything to do with the plot line.
Yeah.
But isn't it interesting how your mind sometimes automatically goes to a couple, it's a heterosexual couple. But now the books that I'm reading, the authors are starting to write in gay and lesbian couples, married couples, but it's not part of the story, it's not part of the plot line. So it's normalizing things.
And I think it's great, and you gave a really good example, because what I wanted to finish on saying is we all have bias, all of us. I do, you do. And what's really cool is being able to realize that sometimes and point it out. And it's not a judgment, it's not a blame thing, it's just pointed out. And what impact does that have when you realize that bias is there? What could that mean for other people? Does it bring them up? Does it empower them? Or could it, inhibit them or limit them in some ways? So it's not a judgment, it's just a fact of life. This is the world we live in. It's about recognizing that and doing the best we can to help everyone. Right.
Yeah, well said. It's a great point to end on.
So thank you, Bev. I love having these heated, controversial discussions with you.
Well, I like to put the cat amongst the pigeons.
Yes. I don't know if you do like that, actually. Interesting choice of words.
That's true. That is true. Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Choice of words. All right.
I'll see you next time.
See you next time.
All right. See you. Bye.
Bye.